My parents invited me to dinner to celebrate my recovery, only to announce they were disinheriting me for my cousin's struggling family. They smiled as they shattered my future, but they forgot one detail. Grandpa Paul was listening, and he wasn't senile. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was still shaking. Honestly, I don't think the tremor in my left hand had stopped since I was discharged from the hospital 3 days prior. It wasn't just the physical weakness, though the doctors had been very clear about that. Severe exhaustion, stress-induced arrhythmia, potential for stroke if you don't stop. It was the vulnerability of it all. I was 32 years old, a landscape architect who had built a firm from the ground up, and yet here I was, barely able to hold a fork without rattling it against the fine china, sitting in my parents' dining room like a chastised child. I had come because they insisted. A welcome home dinner, my mother, Linda, had chirped over the phone. Just family, just us. We need to talk about your future, Sarah. I foolishly interpreted "talk about your future" as an expression of concern. I thought they were finally going to offer the support I had been craving for years, perhaps an offer to help with my medical bills, or simply a promise that I could lean on them while I took the 6-month sabbatical my cardiologist had mandated. I should have known better. In the ecosystem of our family, weakness was not a signal for help. It was a signal for the predators to circle. The dining room was stiflingly warm. My father, Martin, sat at the head of the table, carving a roast with a surgical precision that always made me uneasy. Linda was fluttering about, refilling wine glasses, except mine, of course, because of the medication, and nervously glancing at the clock. And then there was Grandpa Paul, my father's father. He sat at the far end, opposite Martin. At 89, he was physically frail, his body withered by time, but his eyes were sharp, glittering shards of flint. He hadn't said a word since the soup course. He just watched, his gnarled hands resting atop the polished mahogany handle of his cane. "So," Martin said, laying a slice of beef onto his plate. "How are the finances, Sarah? That hospital stay wasn't cheap, I imagine." "It wasn't," I admitted, my voice sounding thinner than I liked. "My insurance covered a chunk, but the deductible is high, and with the firm pausing operations while I recover, it's going to be tight. I might have to dip into the savings I set aside for the house down payment." Linda stopped pouring wine. She exchanged a look with Martin. It was a look I knew well, a silent communication of agreement that usually preceded something terrible. "Well," Linda said, sitting down and smoothing her napkin over her lap. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss, sweetie, your future, and the inheritance." I blinked, confused. "The inheritance? Mom, you and Dad are in your 60s. Why are we talking about this now?" "We're updating the estate planning," Martin said, cutting a piece of meat. "And we've made a decision. We think it's best if we restructure who gets what. Specifically, the liquid assets and the property portfolio." My heart gave a painful thud, unrelated to my condition. "Restructure how?" Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a tight, grimacing thing. "We've decided that your share of the inheritance is going to go to someone more deserving." The room went silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to amplify into booming thuds. I stared at her, sure I had misheard due to the tinnitus that still rang in my ears. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Your cousin Beatrice," Linda clarified, her voice gaining a defensive pitch. "Her and her children, they're struggling, Sarah. You know how hard it's been for them since Beatrice's husband left. She has 3 kids to feed. Well, you're single, you're smart, you have a business, you're resilient." "I am currently unemployed on medical orders," I said, my voice rising. "I am sitting here recovering from a heart condition caused by overworking, and you're telling me that Beatrice, who has never held a job for longer than 3 months, is more deserving." "It's about needs, Sarah," Martin said, grinning. It was a reflex for him, grinning when he was delivering bad news, a nervous tic that made him look cruel. "Your cousin's kids need it more. It takes a village, you know." More deserving than your own son, or daughter in this case? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. You're cutting me out, completely. It's not cutting you out, Linda sighed, waving a hand dismissively. We'll leave you the antique collection, but the foo. NDS, the house, the investments. Beatrice needs stability. I looked at them, my parents. The people who were supposed to be my safety net. They saw me drowning, and instead of throwing a lifeline, they were taking the boat and giving it to someone who was standing perfectly dry on the shore. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. I placed my fork down. The metal clinked against the china, a sharp punctuation mark in the heavy air. Nausea roiled in my stomach, hot and acidic. It wasn't just the money. God, if they had said they were donating it to charity, I might have understood. If they had said they wanted to travel the world and spend every dime, I would have cheered for them. But Beatrice, who had bullied me relentlessly through high school. Beatrice, who had borrowed $2,000 from me 5 years ago for a business venture that turned out to be a weekend trip to Cabo and never paid me back. Beatrice, the golden child of the extended family simply because she had provided grandchildren, while I had focused on my career. You can't be serious, I said, looking from Linda to Martin. You know Beatrice drives a leased Range Rover, right? You know she gets her nails done weekly. That doesn't look like struggling to me. Appearances can be deceiving, Linda snapped, her tone hardening. She puts on a brave face for the world. You wouldn't understand, Sarah. You don't have children. You don't know the pressure of providing. I have employees, I countered. I have people whose livelihoods depend on me. I know about pressure. That's why I'm in this condition. Martin took a sip of wine, looking bored. It's done, Sarah. The lawyer drafted the papers yesterday. We're signing them next week. We just wanted to tell you face to face out of respect. Respect, the word tasted like ash. I looked down at my hands. They were pale, the veins prominent. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I had spent my 20s working 80-hour weeks, missing holidays, skipping vacations, all to build something to be the daughter they could be proud of. I never asked them for a dime. I fixed their garden for free. I managed their rental property bookings for free. I was the responsible one, and my reward was to be discarded because I was deemed resilient enough to survive the fall. You're punishing me for being successful, I said quietly. You're punishing me for not needing you. We're rewarding family values, Martin corrected. Beatrice is a mother. I looked over at Grandpa Paul. He was still watching, his blue eyes darting back and forth between Martin and me like a spectator at a tennis match. He hadn't touched his food. He was chewing on the inside of his cheek, a habit he only displayed when he was deeply calculating something. He caught my eye. For a split second, the stony expression on his face cracked. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of comfort, it was a nod of acknowledgement. Like a general acknowledging a soldier on the battlefield. And then I remembered something. A memory from 15 years ago when I was 17. Grandpa Paul had sat me down in his study when he was first organizing the family trusts. He had shown me a leather binder. Sarah, he had said, people get funny when they see zeros on a bank statement. They forget who earned it. You have a good head on your shoulders. Never let them convince you that you don't matter. My parents were grinning, self-satisfied with their benevolence toward Beatrice, drunk on their own perceived generosity. But in their arrogance, they had forgotten one crucial thing. They treated Grandpa Paul like furniture, like an old relic that came with the house. They forgot that the house and everything in it didn't actually belong to them yet. To understand why this cut so deep, you have to understand the history. My devotion to this family wasn't casual, it was sacrificial. 3 years ago, when Martin had his hip replacement, who moved back in for 6 weeks to manage the household. Me. Beatrice sent a get-well-soon balloon. When Linda got audited by the IRS because she tried to do her own taxes to save money, who spent 4 weekends sorting through 5 years of shoebox receipts and hiring a CPA to fix the mess, me. Beatrice didn't even know it was happening. I had conditioned them to use me. I saw that now. I was the utility player, the fixer, the reliable engine that kept their lives running smoothly. Beatrice was the show pony. She showed up for the fun parts, the holidays, the photo ops, and then vanished when the dishes needed to be done. Just as the silence in the dining room was becoming unbearable, the doorbell rang. "That must be her," Linda squealed, her demeanor instantly shifting from stern matriarch to excited schoolgirl. "We invited Beatrice for dessert, to share the good news." My stomach dropped. They were going to do this in front of her. They wanted an audience foe. My humiliation. Martin got up to answer the door, and moments later, Beatrice swept into the dining room. She was a whirlwind of expensive perfume and jangling jewelry. She wore a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my health insurance deductible, and she was carrying a very small, very expensive-looking clutch. "Hi, Aunt Linda, Uncle Martin," she crooned, kissing them on the cheeks. She turned to me, her smile tight and predatory. "Sarah, wow, you look rested. I heard about the heart thing. Scary. Have you tried yoga? My instructor, Sven, is a miracle worker." "I was in the cardiac ICU, Beatrice," I said coldly. "Yoga wasn't high on the triage list." Right, she waved a manicured hand. "Well, you look pale, maybe get some sun." She pulled out a chair, Grandpa Paul's adjacent chair, and sat down without acknowledging him. "So, is the surprise ready? The kids are in the car with the nanny. I can't stay long. We have a flight to Aspen tomorrow." My jaw tightened. "Aspen, I thought you were struggling." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She looked at Linda, feigning hurt. "See? This is what I deal with. Judgment. Always judgment. Sarah, struggling is relative. Just because we go to Aspen doesn't mean we have security. It's about securing the legacy for the children." "Beatrice is right," Linda said, rushing to pour Beatrice a glass of wine. "Sarah, don't be bitter, it's unbecoming." Beatrice took the wine glass, swirling the red liquid. She looked at me, and for the first time, the mask slipped completely. There was no concern in her eyes, only greed. She looked around the dining room, her gaze lingering on the crystal chandelier, the artwork, the silver. It was the look of someone measuring drapes for a house they hadn't bought yet. "So," Beatrice said, taking a sip and looking directly at me, "when do I get the keys to the lake house? I was thinking of renovating the kitchen. That tile is so dated." The lake house, my sanctuary, the place I had personally landscaped, stone by stone, over 3 summers. The place Grandpa Paul and I had built the dock together. Martin cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. "We're signing the papers next week, Beatrice. The trust, the properties. It will all be transferred to a stewardship for you and the children. Sarah understands. She's fine." Beatrice smirked. "Of course she is. She's strong. She doesn't need help like I do." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Besides, Sarah, what would you even do with all this money? You work all the time. You'd probably just put it in a 401k. Boring." She laughed, Linda laughed, Martin chuckled. That was the moment. The sound of their collective laughter, mocking my prudence, mocking my labor, mocking my very existence. Slam. The noise was like a gunshot. Grandpa Paul had lifted his heavy oak cane and brought it down on the table with a force that rattled the silverware and silenced the room instantly. He slowly pushed his chair back. The wood scraped against the floor, a harsh, grinding sound. He stood up, trembling slightly with effort, but his posture was erect. He looked at Martin, then at Linda, and finally he fixed his gaze on Beatrice. "Say their names," he roared, his voice devoid of the rasp of age, booming with the command of the man who had built this family's fortune from dirt. "Let's hear this nonsense out loud. Tell me exactly whose money you are giving away." The silence following Grandpa Paul's outburst was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the vacuum created when a bomb detonates, sucking the oxygen out of the room before the shockwave hits. Martin, my father, was the first to recover. He chuckled, a nervous, dry sound that grated against the tension. "Dad, please, you're upset. The excitement of the dinner. Maybe we should get you some water. or call Dr. Evans. He was doing it already, dismissing the patriarch, attempting to paint the lion as a confused old house cat. "I don't need water, Martin," Grandpa Paul said. His voice was terrifyingly steady. He didn't sit back down. He remained standing, leaning on his cane with both hands, his knuckles white but his grip iron-hard. "And I certainly don't need that quack Evans. What I need is for you to answer my question. Whose money are you giving away?" It's the family money, Dad," Linda stammered, her eyes darting between her husband and her father-in-law. "The estate. We're just managing it for the future." "Managing it?" Grandpa Paul repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "Is that what we call it now? Robbing Peter to pay Paul? Or, in this case, robbing Sarah to pay for Beatrice's ski trips?" Beatrice stood up then, her face flushing an ugly mottled red. "Excuse me, I am trying to survive, grandfather. You have no idea what it's like." "I have no idea," Grandpa cut her off, his blue eyes blazing. "I built this house with my own hands before your fath. Was even born. I built the company that paid for that tracksuit you're wearing. Do not speak to me about survival, girl. You wouldn't know survival if it bit you on the leg." He turned his gaze to me. The fire in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "Sarah, help me to my study. Bring the wine, I need a drink, and you need the truth." "Dad, you can't just walk out," Martin started, rising from his chair. "Sit down, Martin," Grandpa barked. The authority in his voice was so absolute that my father actually sat back down, his mouth hanging open. "I am not finished, but I am finished eating with thieves. Sarah, now." I stood up. My legs felt steadier than they had all night. The adrenaline had chased away the arrhythmia, replacing the flutter in my chest with a cold, hard focus. I walked to the head of the table, offered Grandpa my arm, and together we walked out of the dining room. We left them there, my parents and Beatrice, sitting in the wreckage of their celebration. The walk to the study was slow. Grandpa's breathing was heavy, a rasping rhythm that reminded me of his age, but his steps were deliberate. When we entered the study, the smell hit me: old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. It was a scent of permanence, a stark contrast to the shifting loyalties in the dining room. He sank into his leather armchair and pointed a shaking finger at the heavy oak safe in the corner. "Combination is your birthday. Month, day, year, open it." I froze. "My birthday." "Always has been," he grunted. I knelt before the safe. 041292. The tumblers clicked, a heavy mechanical sound of finality. The door swung open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars, just a series of thick, color-coded binders. "Bring the red one," he commanded. I handed it to him. He opened it, his hands smoothing the pages with reverence. "Your father thinks he owns everything because I let him play CEO," Grandpa said quietly. "He thinks because I stepped back 10 years ago, the assets transferred. He thinks the revocable living trust is under his control as the primary trustee." "Is it?" I asked, sitting on the ottoman opposite him. "It is," Grandpa said, a mischievous glint returning to his eye. "As long as I am incapacitated or dead, but as you can see," he tapped his chest, "I am neither." He turned the binder around. It was a deed, the deed to the lake house, and underneath it, the controlling documents for the family investment portfolio. "The lawyer they hired, that man simply drafted amendments," Grandpa explained, his voice gaining strength. "Amendments that require the signature of the grantor, me, to be valid. Martin has been trying to get me to sign them for months. He slips them in with medical forms. He slips them in with tax documents. I've read every single one." I stared at the papers. "So they haven't disinherited me, because they can't." "Technically, they can't," Grandpa said, "but they are dangerous, Sarah, if they declare me incompetent. If they get a doctor to sign off that I have dementia, Martin automatically becomes the grantor. He gains full control. And then he signs everything over to that leech, Beatrice." A chill went down my spine. "That's why they keep pushing Dr. Evans. That's why they talk over you." "Exactly," Grandpa said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. This opens the safety deposit box at the First National downtown. Inside is the original trust, the one that names you the successor trustee if I deem Martin unfit. I prepared it 5 years ago when I saw how Beatrice had her claws in Linda. He pressed the key into my hand. The metal was warm from his pocket. You need to get that document, Sarah, and you need to hire a lawyer. Not my lawyer, Martin pays him now. You need an outsider, someone who eats sharks for breakfast. I looked at the key, then at his face. The frailty was there, yes, but the resolve was made of granite. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for him. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady. I'll destroy their plan. Good, Grandpa nodded. But first, we need ammunition. Beatrice isn't just greedy, she's desperate. People don't act like this unless they are running from something. Find out what it is. The next morning, the house was quiet, but it was the silence of a trench before the whistle blows. I had stayed in my old bedroom, mostly to keep an eye on Grandpa Paul. I woke up with a singular purpose. I spent the morning on the phone, not on my cell. I didn't trust it not to be on a family plan Martin could access, but on the landline in Grandpa's study, with the door locked. I called a friend from college, Jessica, who is now a forensic accountant. I need you to look into someone, I had whispered. Beatrice Miller, public records, liens, judgments, anything legal. Give me an hour, Jessica had said. By noon, I had a PDF in my email inbox that made M. Why jaw drop? I walked into the kitchen. My mother, Linda, was there, furiously scrubbing a counter that was already clean. Martin was drinking coffee, staring at a tablet, his face a mask of agitation. Beatrice wasn't there. She had likely retreated to her hotel or wherever she was staying to regroup. Good morning, I said, pouring myself a glass of water. Martin looked up. His eyes were cold. We need to talk about last night, Sarah. Your grandfather is unwell. We're worried his outburst was a symptom of something deeper. Cognitive decline. He seemed pretty sharp to me, I said, leaning against the counter. He remembered the details of the trust better than you did. Linda stopped scrubbing. She turned to me, her face pinched. Sarah, don't encourage him. It's cruel. He doesn't understand the financial reality. We are trying to help family. Why are you so selfish? You have a career. Beatrice has nothing. Why does she have nothing, Mom? I asked calmly. She's 40 years old. She's had every advantage. Why is she a charity case? Her husband left her, Linda cried, tears springing to her eyes. He abandoned her and those poor babies. He cleaned out their accounts. Did he? I asked. Or is that just what she told you? The front door opened. Beatrice walked in, dragging a large Louis Vuitton suitcase. She looked frantic, though she tried to mask it with a veneer of annoyance. Uncle Martin, she said, ignoring me completely. I can't stay at the hotel. The service is appalling. I was hoping I could stay in the guest wing until the papers are signed. Of course, Bea, Martin said, standing up. This is your home too. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the room. It isn't. Beatrice whipped her head around. Excuse me. I spoke to Grandpa this morning. I lied, partially. He's calling his own lawyer today to review the competency claim you're planning to file. Martin froze. How did you know about that? I know everything, Dad, I said, bluffing with the confidence of a poker pro. I know you're trying to use Dr. Evans to declare him unfit so you can bypass his signature. And I know why you're doing it so fast, because Beatrice is pressuring you. Beatrice laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You're delusional. I'm not pressuring anyone. I'm family. You're a liability, I said. I looked you up, Beatrice. The color drained from her face. It was instantaneous. The confident socialite vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. I don't know what you're talking about, she hissed. I think you do, I said, stepping closer. I think you know exactly what public records say about your abandonment. Tell them, Beatrice. Tell them why your husband actually left. Sarah, stop it, Linda shouted. Stop attacking her. He didn't leave her, Mom, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Beatrice. She divorced him 3 years ago, and she got a massive settlement, $2 million. Where did it go, Beatrice? The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the one in the dining room the night before. Martin looked at Beatrice, confusion clouding his features. 2 million? But you said he left you with nothing. You said you couldn't pay rent. She's lying, Beatrice shrieked. Her poise was gone, her hands were shaking. Sarah is jealous, she's making it up. It's public record, Beatrice, I said calmly. Case number 44-B in the Superior Court. Easy to find if you actually look, instead of just believing the sob story. So, I'll ask again. You had $2 million 3 years ago. You have 0 today. You're asking my parents to disinherit their daughter to fill a black hole that you dug yourself. Where is the money? Beatrice looked at Martin, then at Linda. She realized the poor single mom act was fracturing. She needed a new angle. She sneered, her lip curling up to reveal her teeth. It doesn't matter, she spat. It doesn't matter where it went, I deserve this. I was the one who was nice to you, Aunt Linda. I called you, I sent you cards. Sarah never calls. Sarah is cold. Who cares if I spent the money? I'm here, I'm the one who loves you. Love, I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You don't love them, you're hunting them. Get out, Beatrice hissed. Uncle Martin, tell her to get out, she's upsetting me, she's upsetting the balance. Martin looked at me. He looked at the daughter he had raised, the one who had managed his recovery, the one who had saved Linda from the IRS. Then he looked at Beatrice, the niece who sent nice cards and needed saving. Sarah, Martin said, his voice low, maybe you should go to your apartment, just to let things cool down. My heart broke. Even with the truth staring him in the face, that she had lied about the settlement, he still chose her. He chose the flattery over the loyalty. Fine, I said, I'll go, but I'm taking Grandpa's instructions with me, and Dad, if you sign anything at L without Grandpa's explicit, uncoerced consent, I will sue you for elder abuse. And I will win. I turned and walked out. I didn't go to my apartment, though. I went straight to the bank. I retrieved the trust documents from the safety deposit box. Holding the original, notarized binder felt like holding a shield. It was clear as day. In the event of Martin's failure to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries or the grantor, Sarah becomes successor trustee. But I needed more than just a document. I needed to destroy Beatrice's credibility so thoroughly that even my parents' willful blindness couldn't save her. I spent the next 3 days in a war room of my own making, my small apartment living room. I didn't sleep much. My heart monitor beeped occasionally to warn me to slow down, but I couldn't. Jessica, my forensic accountant friend, went deeper. Sarah, it's worse than just the settlement, Jessica told me over the phone on Tuesday. I found a pattern. She's done this before. What do you mean? Before she mooched off your parents, she was living with an aunt in Florida. Aunt passed away 2 years ago. The estate was supposed to be split between 3 cousins. It mysteriously vanished in bad investments that Beatrice managed as the executor. The cousins are still in litigation, but the money is gone. Offshore online gambling accounts, Sarah. She's an addict, a high-stakes slot addict. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just greedy, she was sick. And she was going to feed my parents' life savings into a digital slot machine. Can you prove the gambling? I asked. I have the transactions, Jessica said, linked to a shell company she uses. It's messy, but it's undeniable. Send it to me. While I was building the dossier, the war at home was escalating. Beatrice had convinced Martin to change the locks on the main house. I found out when I went to check on Grandpa, and my key didn't work. I pounded on the door. Martin opened it, looking haggard. He had dark circles under his eyes. You can't come in, Sarah, he said through the chain. Beatrice says you're threatening her. She's afraid for her safety. She's afraid of the truth, Dad, I yelled. She's a gambling addict. She blew her aunt's inheritance in Florida. She's doing the same to you. Stop it, Martin shouted, closing his eyes. Just stop. Why can't you just be happy for us helping family? Why do you have to ruin everything with these conspiracy theories? It's not a theory if I have bank statements. I held up the manila envelope I had brought. Look at it. He hesitated. He looked at the envelope. His hand twitched toward the door chain. Martin, who is it? Beatrice's voice drifted from the hallway. Martin flinched. Go away, Sarah, please. The signing is on Friday. Just let it be. He slammed the door in my face. I stood there on the porch of my childhood home, staring at the wood grain. Friday, 2 days away. They were going to sign over the control of the estate, effectively handing a match to an arsonist. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. She took his phone. She's giving him sleeping pills so he sleeps all day. Help me. Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable was the housekeeper. She had been with us for 20 years. Panic surged through me. They were sedating Grandpa Paul. They were keeping him drugged so he couldn't object, so Dr. Evans could walk in, see a groggy, confused old man, and sign the competency waiver. It was kidnapping in plain sight. I realized then that legal documents weren't enough. I needed an intervention, and I needed to make it public. Friday was the signing ceremony. My mother, in her infinite need for social validation, had turned it into a small event. She had invited the local pastor, a few close friends, to witness the generosity of spirit, and the notary. It was a performance. Perfect. I called the lawyer I had hired, a shark named Mr. Henderson, who Grandpa had recommended from his old days. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice shaking with rage. They are holding my grandfather against his will and drugging him, and on Friday they plan to commit fraud in front of an audience. We can get an emergency injunction, Henderson said smoothly, but if you want to end this permanently, let them start the ceremony. Let them put the pen to paper. That's intent. Then we walk in. I don't just want to stop them, I said, thinking of Grandpa Paul trapped in his room, thinking of Beatrice's smirk, thinking of my father's betrayal. I want to bury them. Then bring the file, Henderson said, and wear something sharp. We're going to a party. I hung up. I looked at the dossier of Beatrice's gambling debts. I looked at the original trust document, and I looked at the text from Mrs. Gable. They wanted a show. I was going to give them the finale of a lifetime. Friday arrived with a menacing gray sky, the kind that promised a storm but held it back just. To prolong the tension, I pulled up to the house in Mr. Henderson's black sedan. The driveway was lined with cars, the pastor's Lexus, the notary's hatchback, and Beatrice's leased Range Rover, parked prominently in front like a flag claimed by a conqueror. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. I looked tired, yes, but the weakness was gone. In its place was a cold, calculated fury. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer, grabbed the heavy briefcase containing the dossier and the trust, and nodded to Henderson. Let's go, I said. The front door was unlocked. We walked in just as the ceremony was beginning in the living room. It was grotesque. Linda had set up a table with flowers and the legal documents arranged like sacred scriptures. Martin stood by the fireplace, looking uncomfortable but compliant. Beatrice sat in the center, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the grateful, humbled beneficiary to perfection. Grandpa Paul was there, slumped in his wheelchair in the corner, looking groggy and disoriented, his head lolling slightly to the side. And so, the pastor was saying, through this act of charity, we see the true bond of family. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Every head turned. Sarah, Linda gasped, clutching her pearls. What are you doing here? You weren't invited. I'm here to save you from federal prison, Mom, I said, walking into the room with Henderson flanking me like a bodyguard, and to save Grandpa from that predator. I pointed a finger directly at Beatrice. Beatrice stood up, her face twisting. She's crazy. Uncle Martin, call the police. She's harassing me. I think the police would be very interested in this gathering, Henderson said, his deep baritone filling the room. especially the part where you are attempting to coerce a signature from a medicated elder. He's not medicated, Martin stammered. He's just tired. Mrs. Gable says otherwise, I said, holding up my phone with the text message displayed. She says Beatrice has been feeding him her own sleeping pills for 3 days. A murmur went through the small crowd of witnesses. The notary looked uneasy, shifting in his seat. Lies, Beatrice shrieked. She's a jealous, barren witch who can't stand that I have children. Let's talk about your children, Beatrice, I said, slamming the briefcase onto the coffee table. I opened it and pulled out the thick stack of papers Jessica had compiled. And let's talk about where their inheritance went. I tossed the first bundle of papers onto the table. They fanned out, bank statements, colorful graphs of wire transfers, and logos of online casinos. $300,000 in slot machine losses in the last 18 months, I announced. $50,000 wired to a shell company in the Caymans last week. And this, I held up a court document, is the lawsuit from your cousins in Florida. You didn't lose their money in bad investments. You gambled it away, every single cent. The room was deadly silent. Linda picked up a bank statement, her hands trembling. She stared at it, her eyes widening as she processed the numbers. Beatrice, Linda whispered, what is this? They're fake, Beatrice screamed, lunging for the papers. She forged them. Henderson stepped in front of her, blocking her path with an impassive stare. These are certified forensic audits, Ms. Miller, admissible in court, unlike the sob story you've been peddling. I turned to my father. He was staring at the papers, his face pale. The reality was finally piercing his denial. You were going to give her everything, I said to him, my voice breaking slightly. You were going to let her gamble away Grandpa's legacy. You were going to let her bankrupt you. For what? For a thank you card. Martin looked at Beatrice. She wasn't crying anymore. She was snarling, her face contorted in ugly, desperate rage. She looked exactly like the person she was. Grandpa, I called out, rushing to his wheelchair. I knelt beside him and took his hand. It was cold. Grandpa, can you hear me? He blinked, his eyes struggling to focus. He looked at me, then at the chaos in the room. He took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting through the fog of the sedatives. Sarah, he croaked. I'm here, I said. I have the trust, I have the key. He squeezed my hand. It was weak, but it was there. He turned his head slowly toward Martin. Martin, Grandpa rasped. His voice was a whisper, but in the silence it sounded like a shout. You are fired. Martin flinched, as if he'd been slapped. And you, Grandpa said, shifting his gaze to Beatrice. Get out of my house, before I have you dragged out. Beatrice looked around the room. She saw the pastor's judgment, the notary packing his bag, Linda's horror, and Henderson's stone-faced glare. She realized the game was over. Fine, she screamed, grabbing her purse. Keep your mo. Nay, you're all miserable anyway. I hope you rot in this house. She stormed out, knocking over a vase of flowers on her way. The crash of the glass shattering was the final punctuation mark on her deception. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Beatrice was gone within the hour. We didn't just let her leave. Henderson filed a restraining order and forwarded the dossier on the Florida estate theft to the district attorney there. Last I heard, she was facing multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her struggling facade crumbled instantly, and she was forced to move in with a distant relative who kept her on a very short leash. As for my parents, the reckoning was quieter but far more painful. Once the adrenaline faded, the reality set in. Grandpa Paul was taken to the hospital for a full detox and evaluation. The doctors confirmed the presence of sedatives in his system, prescription pills that matched a bottle found in Beatrice's guest room. Martin sat in the hospital waiting room, his head in his hands. He didn't look like the arrogant patriarch anymore. He looked like a man who had narrowly avoided driving his family off a cliff. I didn't know, he kept whispering. I didn't know she was drugging him. You didn't want to know, I said, sitting beside him but not touching him. You wanted to be the hero so badly that you ignored every red flag. You chose her lie over my truth because her lie made you feel important. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't fix this. No, I agreed. You can't, not yet. Grandpa Paul recovered, though he was never quite as physically strong as he was before the drugging. But his mind remained sharp. He followed through on his declaration. He removed Martin as the trustee of the family estate. It skips a generation, Grandpa told the lawyers a week later, with me sitting by his side. Sarah is the sole trustee. Martin and Linda get a monthly stipend contingent on Sarah's approval. They can live in the house, but they own nothing. It was a harsh sentence, but necessary. My parents had to learn that trust wasn't a right, it was an asset they had squandered. In the months that followed, things changed. I moved back into my own apartment, my heart arrhythmia fully stabilized now that the stress of the imminent disinheritance was gone. The firm picked up again. I hired Mrs. Gable to work for me part-time as well, giving her a raise for her loyalty. My relationship with my parents is polite. We have Sunday dinners, but they are different now. There is no more condescension, no more comments about me being cold or work-obsessed. They treat me with a careful, terrified respect, like employees dining with the boss. Grandpa Paul moved into the guest wing of the lake house, my lake house now. We spend weekends there. I push his wheelchair down to the dock I built, and we watch the sunset over the water. One evening, looking out at the gold-flecked waves, he reached over and patted my hand. You did good, kid, he said. You protected the fort. I just did what the landscape required, I smiled, squeezing his hand. I pulled the weeds so the roots could survive. He laughed, a genuine, wheezing sound of joy. We sat there in silence, two survivors who knew exactly what peace was worth, watching the sun dip below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in victory.